I was feeling a little bittersweet today. This is the last of the stations, the 16th station of the journey of the cosmic Christ we've been on. I was feeling a little sad because it's been such a beautiful journey of spiritual awakening. It's been just so perfect with our mission about waking up our consciousness to live our best lives, and then we help others do the same. And so that journey, as you said so beautifully this morning, Emily, is about returning to the place of oneness and to find out what it truly means to be human. And before we talk about that's not my favorite tablet, by the way, but we'll talk about why not in just a minute. I want to share this idea of oneness is not a new thing. Buddha said 2,500 years ago, everything in this world is connected by a series of ties like a net. Nothing is independent or isolated. A net is a series of interconnected meshes, not messes, meshes. And each mesh has its place and responsibility in relation to all the other meshes. And then about 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome at that time in 180, said, all things are linked with one another. This oneness is sacred. There is nothing that is not interconnected with everything else. And then go forward about 2,000 years, and Martin Luther King says, all are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I am supposed to be. Puts a large responsibility on us. But guess what? We're made for it. We're made for it. It's how we're designed, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But let's get to this 16th tablet of the Pentecost. Now, the Pentecost is a word that shows up at both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And trust me, I'm not a biblical scholar or a historical scholar. If you want the true, honest details, talk to Dr. Jim Van Cleve, our systematic theologian, but I'll do the best I can. Anyway, in the Old Testament, the Pentecost is the Greek word for the festival of wheat. It's the Feast of Weeks, where they celebrate the harvest. The Hebrew word for the Feast of Weeks is Shavuot, which means, and I love this, I want you to really take this in, why this is so important, renewing our acceptance of God's gifts. So that's what this means. Renewing our acceptance of God's gifts. Now, in Christianity, the Christian holiday of the Pentecost is very interesting because the Feast of Weeks comes 50 days after Passover. And now in the Christian tradition, their holiday, Pentecost, comes 50 days after Easter. And it's a time when it is said that the Holy Spirit comes down, and you know, these little disciples, I got to tell you about the disciples. They followed Jesus around really nicely, but they didn't really claim their spiritual authority. You know, they were the followers. And we all need followers, but we've got to claim our spiritual authority. Now, that doesn't mean we have authority over anybody else. What spiritual authority means, to me anyway, is that we allow our spiritual consciousness, our spiritualized consciousness, to have power over our ego that wants to keep us small. So the disciples hadn't gotten there yet, and Jesus had told them that they will get their power They will get their power when the Holy Spirit descends on them. So here comes a time, they actually were at the Feast of Weeks. They were celebrating the harvest, and they were renewing their acceptance of God's gifts, and boom, Holy Spirit comes down at that time. And this is kind of a scary tablet because it wasn't a peaceful Holy Spirit, like a sweet little angel that flies down and blesses you. It was a wake-up call. It says that there were profound sounds and violent winds and tongues of fire. It was like a real wake-up call, really shaking us awake. And that's what hit those disciples and other followers. And it says in the Gospel of Matthew that at that time, they were infused and ignited. I want you to feel it, because, is that a little scary to you? Just a little bit? It's just a little. Well, boom! We have to be shaken awake, infused, igniting life, love, and understanding. That's what it means to have spiritual authority, to be activated with livingness, with love, compassion, and understanding. You see, at that time when, boom, you're empowered by Spirit, it's not that what around you changes itself, but when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So when we get infused with Spirit, our life changes dramatically. I can't tell you that things around us change, but the way we look at them and experience them change completely. So we end this journey of our Stations of the Cosmic Christ by coming to a place to truly accept our spiritual authority. And I'll get to a place until when we talk about our spiritual authority, what happens to us. But that's what we need to do today, to be available and open, to be ignited by life, to be ignited by life. If we think about it, there's just one tree of life from which everything comes. Everything. But our little mind can make us feel like a little leaf or a lonely little branch, and we can feel separated. And that can come from confusion in our own minds, cosmic confusion in the world. We can get confused because there's so much going on, and we feel isolated and alone. Because when we're separated from that spiritual wholeness, that interconnectedness that we talked about in the very beginning, from 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 80 years ago, whatever, when we get separated from that spiritual wholeness, then we feel isolated and alone. And that's when we can really suffer. We can suffer from loneliness when we're never alone. But we forget. And what happens? We get into that place. So I don't know about you, but I know that it happens. So we want more gadgets in our life. More things to entertain us. You know what I mean? More things to do our work for us. Or more distractions. So we don't have to do the work. We don't have to do the work. If you think about it, when we get to the end of our life, and we think about what our life has been, it's not going to be about all that we had. It's going to be about our relationships we have. Our relationship with God, with ourselves, with each other, the people we're closest to our community, with the world. It's going to be about relationships. We need to spend more time having the courage to develop deeper relationships, which is a scary thing, because you may not like this, so I hope nobody has tomatoes right there, but life isn't about feeling good. It's learning to be good at feeling. Because when Spirit zaps you, when you get zapped by Spirit, what transpires is creativity and compassion. And if you think about it, creativity contains chaos, doesn't it? Things are a mess when you're creative. There's a lot of stuff going on. So in creativity is chaos, which can get us off base if we aren't grounded. And in compassion comes pain because we care. I remember, I'll never forget, the Sunday I talked about the humpback whale that was caught in the bay, and how the people, the environmentalists came and freed that humpback whale. She was near death, and how she went around and thanked each one of them and looked them in the eye, and they were changed forever. People came out crying because they were so touched by that simple story sharing. Think about when you have been broken open because of creativity. It could be music, it could be art, it could be something creative, or you've been broken open with compassion in relationships, how we treat each other as a human family. When we think about that, to me, that's what it means to be ignited by Spirit. You know, ordinary people, and I guess we're all ordinary in the fact that we all have the same sort of parts, right? We're sort of ordinary in that. We actually all come from a single cell. But inside that single cell is so much innate wisdom that it is guided to grow into a human being. So in that way, we're extraordinary. And that innate wisdom in us mirrors the universal wisdom that we're all part of. But anyway, getting back to the ordinary people. Ordinary people, just meaning people, can do extraordinary things. All it takes is doing what we're talking about today, is spiritualizing our consciousness and looking at things differently. When we spiritualize our consciousness, we see things differently. Unless we're seeing life as beautiful, as loving, as wisdom expressing, we're really blind through our spiritual eye. We have to wake that up. Now, I'd love to tell you that waking up spiritually is an easy thing. Does anybody think it's easy? Because it's not really an easy thing. Now, I heard something that I haven't forgotten, and Michael Beckwith shared it, and I don't know if he put it together or was just repeating it, I'm not sure, but it's about the 4 stages of spiritual awakening. And I want you to, I think we fluctuate around in several of them. But just see where you are right now and what you could do to maybe step it up a little bit. The first stage of spiritual awakening, and we'll all recognize this, is when we feel like life happens to us. I'm a victim. I'm a victim. Why is this happening to me again? How many of you have said that recently? Why is this happening to me again? And if we're going to move from that kind of victim consciousness where life is always happening to us, we're going to have to give up our blame. Because if you notice, when you're blaming something or someone, you've got 3 fingers pointing back at you. So when you're pointing your finger at something else for being the cause of your problem, you better take these 3 fingers and look at what's really happening here. So we got to give up the blame and the shame, because shame is one of the lowest frequency of emotions there is. We do the best we can with the tools we have. We do better when we know better. So if you feel shameful, start knowing better. It's part of the process of life. But after that, after we move from it's happening to me, we start learning about some of the laws, the principles. The law of cause and effect, the law of reciprocity, the law of love, all these things. And we realize, life is happening by me. There are laws and tools I can use to control my thoughts. I can control my thoughts. But then, in order to move from that stage, because first thing you do, when you start in a metaphysical teaching, is you find a parking place. God's just saved a perfect parking place for you. You know that? We've all done that. The perfect place. Well, we have to give up our power and control. We have to give up that need to control and to start using a higher spiritual energy, so we go from by me or to me, by me, and the next stage we move from when we can let go of some of our control of having to have things just the way we want it. right? We move to life happens through me. Life happens through me. I'm a vessel. It is not I, but the God in me that does the work. I am a vessel. And that's a beautiful way to be. But it's not in true spiritual authority yet. We still have the need to let go of any thoughts of separation or being different or separate. And then we move into the place, and this is where I'm talking about spiritual authority. Life happens as me. I am one with God. Can you just say that? I am one with God. We can feel it. We can feel it. I am one with God. And that's that spiritualized consciousness that's living from wholeness. And I am one with God. Use me. I'm being used. I am a vessel. I share the light. I share the love. By me, through me, as me. And I think we fluctuate around, but keeping focused on where we want to be, how we want to show up in the world. Now, once we gain our spiritual authority, meaning we recognize that there's a power greater than we are, of which we are a part, and this power is in us, that there's a candle, a spark in us that's urging us to shine our light, to be bright, to do our part. Once we realize that there's something more to life, we realize that spiritual authority isn't enough. There's a part of all of us that crave spiritual experience. You know, you can't put God, you can't put spiritual knowingness, you can't put that in words. It has to be felt. I want you really to think about the times that you've been broken open. It's not something you can put in words. When you're standing at the front of the beauty of nature, when you see compassion happening. I know today I was watching the news to check what was going on in Houston, and I saw this mother and her little child just crying because of the kindness of their husband and father, who amidst just a terrible situation, he went out in just all this violent water and was making sure that all the neighbors were okay. And one of the older women was sitting there with the mom and the daughter, and she said, I don't know what I would have done without this man's compassion. And that's a time we break open, when we see people caring for one another. So it's about feeling the experience, feeling what it feels like. Remember, life is not about feeling good, it's about feeling. We have to be able to feel the pain and feel the blessings, that it's all part of this beautiful, beautiful process. So whatever you're feeling right now, I'm going to ask our practitioners and our ministers to just prepare for our prayer wall, if they just go to the back. And I'm going to invite us to just feel that, to prepare ourselves for prayer by feeling the divine spark within us. And know that that divine spark, which is that spark of wisdom, that spark of intelligence that's connected to all things, part of the web of life, that's calling us to ignite that spark, to feel the power and presence of goodness and spirit that is here in this moment and every moment. Just prepare yourself by igniting that spark and say, I am a child of God. My life is significant. I matter. I am an expression of love, of possibility, of truth. And as you prepare your heart right there, take a moment and send praise out, because our blessings are not just for us. Our blessings are to bless this world. As we ignite and light our own candle, we are called to share this light with the world. Our prayer wall is concluding. I'm just going to invite each and every one of us to let this day be the day that the heavens open up, that that we become totally available to the power and presence of infinite good, of spiritual awakening, as we allow ourselves to trust this beautiful universe in which we live and lay our issues, our problems, our concerns, our burdens on the altar of love, knowing they are consumed by the flame of love and goodness, where we receive greater understanding and awareness about all that is and all that is yet to be. And we learn to trust what's in our heart, and that urge for us to seek oneness, to seek light, to seek love and the wisdom in knowing that we are here with an awakened consciousness, with a thought of spiritual wholeness, to be a beneficial presence right here and now, that this is the day to go light our world.